Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome. The Texas Longhorn 2022 football season is kind of officially underway. Players reporting today. I'm Geoff. That's Anwar. This is the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. Welcome. Do us a solid. Like the channel. Subscribe to the channel. Like this video specifically. Leave your comments in the comments section as everybody starts to pour in to the chat room. It is our first live Tuesday night show in a couple of weeks. And it's not a Monday overreaction show. It is OB at night. Typically, this is where I would kind of do my solo thing. But the Texas football coaches, head coach Steve Sarkisian, and the coordinators Kyle Flood and Pete Kwiatkowski met with the media today. A lot to unpack from what was essentially the state of the Texas Longhorns football universe union, if you will. And we're going to react and talk all about it in this video. Anwar, I'll throw it to you. Your first biggest, because we did this exact thing after Big 12 Media Days. And it felt like we were exactly on the same page. Me, you, Alex, we all had the same big takeaways from that. I wonder if today is a little bit different. So I will let you have the floor. The thing that stood out the most today from your perspective was what?
When you say the most, I mean, okay, well, then that means we were jumping right into it.
Like, yeah, we're jumping right into it.
We're jumping right in. Well, we're not even going to, we're just no foreplay here. We're just going right for it. Okay. All right. The thing that jumped out, that stood out the most, is me setting it up with Pete K, saying, hey, coach, I would like to ask you about the pass rush. And his response back to me was, what pass rush? That was what stood out, because there was this huge acknowledgement that, what the hell are you talking about? Like, and then, there was this laughter, this thing, and I was thrown off to the point where I was like, I don't even know how to follow that one up, because but since you put it out there, what do you Ben Davis led them in sacks, like, what do you got to do? I mean, what pass rush? And it will probably be the theme for the entire year, and really what ends up being the theme of what's going to be PK's tenure here at Texas. Every game, Catch, going forward, if we don't see it, it's going to go back to what pass rush, like T-shirts, what pass rush. Now, there's a lot to unpack within that, with what he said, but you asked for the big thing. That was the big thing.
My answer is slightly different. I first want to acknowledge Steve Sarkisian did meet with the media today. we may go like an hour plus tonight, and I don't know how much we'll talk about the things that Sarkisian said from his press conference, primarily because when that ended, I came away thinking, I don't know that I've got three major bullet points out of that. I mean, he basically pushed aside the quarterback question and said, as it relates to a specific day, I'm not really going to tell you guys. So we go on with the watching game. In fact, he indicated that two quarterbacks will start out evenly on day one. That's a little newsy, but it wasn't. There just weren't a lot of major takeaways from Sarkisian. So then I wondered what I would take away from what Kyle Flood and Kwiatkowski would talk about. And I literally just finished listening to the entirety of Kwiatkowski's comments. It was more than the pass rush thing. The more I listened to Kwiatkowski, the more it seemed apparent to me he doesn't have the horses and still doesn't have the horses. He did not talk like a guy that has a lot of confidence that this is going to be a super badass defense, and I think the what pass rush comment is the highlight of that, right? Because he didn't turn around and say, well, wait till you see us this year. That wasn't how it just, I'm fast. First of all, I realized how little I didn't recognize his voice You know, it was like I started listening to him, and it was like, oh, Pete Kwiatkowski. This is what his voice sounds like.
Well, we only get to speak to him once a year. Sarkisian doesn't let his assistant speak. So this is literally the second time since he's been here that he has spoken, and we won't speak to him again until next year. So
that's wild, by the way.
That's it.
So in his like someone who's been kidnapped and is releasing a video to his family to let him know that he's okay. Like we heard from Kwiatkowski, but I came away thinking, oh shit, about the defense. It just kind of, that's where I'm at on that. And we can talk about the pass rush, but at every layer of the defense, this is still a defense that's got a long way to go. And I thought Kwiatkowski was quite open that this is a group that's not there yet, that isn't loaded with proven players yet, that they're still learning to tackle and not make mistakes and be consistent. And, I think Kirk Bowles asked him, Kirk loves to ask he loved to ask Herman this question. He loves to ask how many difference makers do you have?
Correct.
And when Kwiatkowski was asked that question, he threw out DeMarvion Overshown's name, and that was kind of it. So
you mentioned Jalen Ford. You mentioned Jalen Ford as a guy who's looked good. But that was a little bit towards the linebacker question.
Yeah, I mean, he talked about he talked about the interior and that he thought that Byron Murphy was a good player, and he did the roll call. But at the end of the day, by the way, thanks to Agent Z for getting us started on the Super Chat. We love that you love the show. We'll try to continue to keep up the good work. He didn't sound like a guy with a ton of pressure on him, but he also didn't sound like a guy that expected to he didn't sound like Steve Sarkisian talking about the offense.
You see Eric's comment here on the screen, Catch?
I mean, and I also have some thoughts about the Gary Patterson part of that.
That was an interesting.
There's a lot to unpack from what was said. But when we talk about what should this team's record be this season, and how many losable games are there, and what's the over and under for wins, when we say the number is probably 8.5, and you struggle with 8 or 9, and maybe you lean towards 8. The Kwiatkowski interview session today, to me, would have you leaning towards 8. To me, he seemed to be screaming, we ain't quite ready for prime time yet. He didn't sound like a coach who thought they were on the verge of that. And I think we should all be mindful of what this team is on in all three phases. The defense is one that is a major work in progress. And, he didn't seem overly hyped up about answers to a lot of the questions that quite frankly will define that side of the ball this season.
Catch, what I noticed as a theme of today, and then when you start talking about, the defensive side of the ball, but also a little bit of Sarkisian, when they start talking about the optimism around this season, none of it, or they're saying like, I think the talent is better, or I think our guys have been improved. It becomes, they point to the things that seem a little subjective, like the team camaraderie is better, guys are spending more time together, like it's another year, it's things to that effect. That kind of camaraderie, or Steve Sarkisian talking about, as he talks, once again, starts talking about, we've got to do a better job of in-game adjustments, and when things start going off the rails, and all these kind of things. But you didn't hear him say, You know who's been a badass all offseason long on defense? Yeah. This guy. You know who's been killing it in practice? This guy. You know who's a stud that's come in and we are super excited about? This guy. When it came to those specifics, specific guys, it was always tossed back to general questions, general answers. So it was more about like, hey, guys know each other a little bit better. And in our hesitation, Ketch, as people who've covered this team, is we've heard a lot of people talk about, well, you know, now that guys know each other a little bit better, we've heard about barbecues. We've heard about the summer ping pong. Like, we've heard about pool parties. Like, we've heard about all these things that don't always translate to success. So that's probably the only thing you walked away. You would have want to hear this is what's happening. And this is why we're excited about it. It is more so about some innocuous things that I don't know. You know, I don't know how you measure, and you probably won't be able to measure until after the season.
What pass rush translates to? I ain't got no dudes, man. Simple as that. Like it was an acknowledgement of we can't run from it. We didn't have a pass rush, but in addressing the question, he didn't inject a bunch of optimism for that specific element of this defense moving forward. And, you know, he kept it, and I appreciate that. Like, I come away tonight. We'll finish tonight's show. I have a better mental place for where Kwiatkowski is because we haven't heard from him about any of this stuff. Not last season when it wasn't working. And there was, you know, he was quick to say, you know, some of it was schematic and we got to do a better job. But look, man, a lot of that for me was code for I don't have great players. Didn't have them last year. Don't know if we have them this year. And like, where's the pass rush? Where are the pass rushers? He could have just as easily have said, and you know, it's fascinating. We will remember this. I wondered what the hell we were going to talk about after Sarkisian finished his press conference because there just wasn't a lot of meat on that bone. With Kwiatkowski, I feel like we'll be talking about the aftermath of some of this commentary throughout the season. If they do start rushing the passer, we'll point back to this moment in early August and say, remember when he didn't feel like he had one and he made that joke, and look at where they are. But if they don't, we're going to look back on this moment and go, he told us, he warned us. We may never hear from him again, ever. But, you know, when you asked about, hey, about the pass rush, it was a stunning little bit of insight into the whole thing. And that didn't get followed up with, but hey, we feel a lot better about it this year. It's just not what happened.
He said a lot of what they need to do.
Yeah.
Like he said, get off the ball. He said there's three things I wrote down. He said, get off the ball better, be relentless, you know, better job of defeating at hands and pushing the pocket. Like, he talked about the things that they need to do. He talked about generating the pass rush on third downs. Like, these were the things that he said they need to do. He didn't say these things they feel like they're going to do well. He just said this was what he feels like they need to do going forward. But
he described Ovio Gofu as such an important player this season. I mean, they took him to Big 12 Media Day, but when Kwiatkowski specifically referenced him, he was like, yeah, he was kind of a part-time player a year ago. I mean, there just wasn't we think this guy's going to be the guy that breads our butter. It was, there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about today, but it was a thing that, for me, just listening to the audio, he told us, we always say sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you don't say. And I think that he said a few things today, but there were some obvious omissions from his commentary. He was not a hype man today. He didn't show up and say, I know we finished 100th in the country last year, but this defense this year is going to kick some ass. And that's just not quite what happened. And again, I think he didn't tell any lies. He didn't tell any stories one way or the other. But I do think we've got our finger on the pulse of what this team is. It is a team that's loaded offensively with playmakers. You worry about the offensive line holding up if they're going to play some young guys. But generally speaking, we think that side of the ball is going to be really good. We've got a lot of questions about the defensive side of the ball. So does Pete Kwiatkowski. He has a lot of questions about his own side of the ball. And then, oh, by the way, the Gary Patterson thing exists as well. And I thought he gave a necessary answer to that. But again, sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you don't say. And, he didn't go out of his way to paint that picture as the best situation for him possible. He was like, he's super resourceful. He tried to tell a story about like how far they go back. And it was like, well, you just coached against him. It's not like you guys were boys. You coached against him once upon a time. And, he's a resource and he's been in this conference a long time, but, he didn't gush. And, I'm fascinated to see where this thing goes from here. I found Kwiatkowski likable, considering I wasn't there, so I'm just going based off of listening to him. It sounded like he just seemed to be screaming, I can only do so much. If it's about the Jimmies and the Joes and not the X's and the O's, then we need to acknowledge that we lack some Jimmies and Joes. And I thought very passive aggressively, that's what he told us tonight was, I ain't got enough Jimmies and Joes. I got DeMarvion Overshown and a bunch of maybes.
What was interesting about the whole, about what he said, and it's interesting because when you start, I know you talked about like the Jimmies and the Joes situation, but there's also like a coaching situation that kind of gets my attention a little bit because they said, he said it was they played inconsistently, last season and inconsistent as a defense, but basically when the wheels started falling off, essentially this is when the team would kind of fall apart. He mentioned that there, and he talked about guys who were freelancing at times, maybe trying to do too much, ad-libbing, and that, those things weren't good. And then at that point, coach, some of that does come down to coaching and communicating and explaining to guys, hey, this is where you need to be. This is what you need to be doing. And the fact that, again, that's not only Kwiatkowski said that, but Sarkisian said that as well, as far as him saying he needed to do a better job basically when the wheels started falling off. And really, I know you said something earlier about you didn't think there was not a meat on the bone with Sark, but he said something that I thought was interesting, Ketchum. Maybe we'll come back to later. But I mean, when he started talking about that whole thing, the wheels falling off and how he needs to do better, he started giving. He basically was saying, like, we had a good team because he talked about the Iowa State game, right? And how they had the lead in that game, and then that faltered in there. He brought up Oklahoma State, how they didn't give up a touchdown in the first half. So he started talking about essentially like the defense was playing good, which kind of counters the whole, man, this team, what did they inherit? Because, man, this team was just garbage. And they're like, well, no, it actually wasn't garbage. They were good, but these couple of things happened. So it really became an interesting thing for me with hearing Sarkisian say that and PK say this, especially as relates to the defense. I wonder how much of it is the Jimmies and the Joes, going back to your original statement, and how much it is of the staff that's got to be able to find a way to communicate with these guys because, the saying is, as the head goes, so goes the body. So if the guys are getting flustered or not doing things and freelancing, some of that's on the coaching as well. Can it be all? So there's an interesting Jimmys and Joes in the coaching stuff, whatever that balance is. But it seems to be a little bit of both.
No, and that's completely fair. And, that goes back to Big 12 media days one of the things that stood out about that was that Sarkisian didn't throw any players under the bus. He really was like, I needed to do a better job, and I read the room wrong with regards to leadership. And so there's a lot of this stuff that it's nuanced. There's layers to it, right? I mean, you start talking about how do you go 3 or 4 straight games where you're playing ranked teams and leading them going to the fourth quarter, and then just the wheels come completely off. Well, it's never one thing. It's always a bunch of things and little things. It's never, well, the strength and conditioning failed us. Nobody wants to come out and point a finger on just one thing, or our defense gave it up, or it's always multiple things. It's a reminder that this team went 5-7 last year. I mean, that happened. They lost 6 in a row, and they lost 6 conference games in a row, and then lost to Kansas. And I think today, on the eve of the first practice, it was a reminder that this is not. And Sarkisian can say, why don't we sprint the marathon? Which was a way of saying, let's go out and win all our games and be, a championship outfit. Let's make our progress this season a sprint and not just a slow jog. Well, sometimes a slow jog is what happens. I mean, they went 5-7 last year for a reason. And some of that 5-7 personnel is the same exact personnel this year they're going to depend on to be a lot better. And there are so many, I guess the good news is there's so many areas of improvement that they can still make off the field, on the field, players, coaches, strength and conditioning, all of it. But there's still a lot of room for growth. But in saying that, there's still a lot of room for growth. And when you say that, it means we're not Alabama yet. We're not going to show up with an experienced team with playmakers all over the field that can not just win on any given Saturday, but beat the hell out of anybody on any given Saturday. My big takeaway is this still feels like an 8-4, 9-3 type of team at best. And they got a ways to go before I think we can talk about them as truly being championship contenders. There's a lot of proving that this team still needs to do. And I thought the coaches talked about that on both sides of the ball, even on special teams, right? So Sarkisian is asked about the areas that concern him the most. Mm-hmm. And he said one from each phase of the game. He said offensive line, which is nothing new. We know that. He said secondary, which was a little surprising to me because I kind of think of the secondary as
that's a strength.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then he mentions the kicking game, which often gets completely overlooked, but they are breaking in a new kicker and a new punter. And, those things matter too. And I think everybody will take the presence of Cameron Dicker for granted a little bit. And we'll go into that first game or even the second game of the season against Alabama. And the first time, it's 4th and 4, and field position's a little sketchy, and Alabama brings a little bit of a heat. We don't know how that feels and looks yet. So, like I said, I thought today probably did the best for setting expectations. Yeah. Fans are like, we should win all of the games. And, boy, if they're not in the Big 12 championship game, this thing is a disappointment. The coaches today painted the picture of a team that's still, I think, a major construction project. And it probably will be into the season. And the question is, how many wins can they rack up until they actually get good? They're not good yet.
I definitely think, Ketch, to the point of, hey, let me just kind of set expectations so we're clear. Sarkisian throughout the all season has said this, and he continues with this. There's 35 new players in our program. 35 new guys has got to get it. 7 transfers. They got to get these guys acclimated and get them used to a lot of new faces. Got to get them used to their culture. He talked about, didn't he talk about how many upperclassmen versus, underclassmen that he has, and so he brought that up as well. And again, I think it's just slight reminders that, hey guys, this still might be a work in progress. To your point, I know what you're hoping for and I know what you're expecting, but 35 new players, going to be a lot of underclassmen here, still trying to get these guys to learn how to sponsor adversity, still trying to implement our culture, that's in here. I've got some questions on the offensive line, the secondary, to your point, you to go from Michael Dixon to Cameron Dicker, like a punter kind of situation, and then have Cameron Dicker for 4 years. Like you don't know what it's like to have a good and solid kicker until you need someone to make an extra point against Cal, right? And then you realize, like, damn, having a good, solid, reliable kicker really makes a damn difference. I don't think he was poo-pooing the season. I don't think by any stretch he talked about Sarkisian did about competing for a Big 12 championship. So that still remains the goal. But I do believe that there is that something within the staff that's saying, like, hey, listen, we're going to go out there, we're going to bust our ass, we're going to do the best that we can, and we're going to try to get these guys prepared. But let's understand the reality of our situation. This is some of the realities that we're dealing with. Excited, optimistic, but there is a lot of realities that they have to do. There's a lot of challenges to overcome. And I think that was kind of communicated today.
We'll get back to Kwiatkowski, and we'll talk about Kyle Flood as well. He also spoke with the media, although didn't exactly create, even though there were some interesting things that came out of that. I thought that, and Jeff Banks as well. And, you already posted some of his remarks about Jatavian Sanders at the tight end position over on orangebloods.com. There are still a lot of presents under the tree for us to unpack. Let's just go back to the beginning for a moment and go with Sarkisian. The things, the bullet points, the highlights from you of his 30 minutes with the media. Again, I didn't think there were like 3 bullet points for me when he met with the media just a couple of weeks ago at Big 12 Media Day. I thought the bullet points today were a little less obvious, although I do think he said some interesting things.
Yeah, I mean, there are some interesting things. It's interesting. I'll start with the quarterback stuff because, again, at Big 12 Media Day, Sarkisian says, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to make a decision earlier than I did last year. And then when asked about the quarterback decision, he kind of walked it back a little bit and kind of made it into like, well, he started – the thing that we said, I think it was on Monday about him potentially started talking about Hudson Card. And then all of a sudden, rising from the dead, there was a Hudson Card conversation. And he kind of tried to talk up the QB battle, to which, there was no follow-up questions to that one. So I don't think anyone was overwhelmingly convinced of that. But there's something there where, whether it's to keep Hudson motivated and keep his mind right, even though he says he's going to be mum on that. The thing about it, Ketch, he didn't tell the media until later in training camp who the starting quarterback was going to be, but we had already heard who was getting the number 1 reps. Like, you don't have to tell us, but when your guy's getting the number 1 reps, like, that will be when everyone knows, right? So, I thought that was, a tad bit, interesting. I did talk about, setting expectations with the, the 35 things. He did talk about the adversity thing. I thought was interesting to me, Ketch, because it's a thing that we knew and the things you and I talked about a lot, because there was the conversation of, well, I mean, what the hell did these guys inherit? Like, come on, like they inherited this team. It takes time to build. And you and I kept saying, like, this was a 7-win team, guys, potentially 9. If you without 2 games removed, like, no one said this is going to be a rebuild. And now everyone's talking about how this is a rebuild and how everyone needs to be patient. And I think he kind of finally, I think, went to what you and I have echoed, Ketch, right? Which for a longest time, which is, no, there was enough on this plate to be more successful than you were last season. And he talked about, hey, I got to do a better job of making sure this team responds better to adversity. And Ked's like, we understand that there were times that guys were tuning him out a little bit. Guys weren't necessarily buying in, and to the point where we had the blow-ups, the Joshua Moore thing eventually happened. There was a disconnect. So him talking about how he needs to do better from the adversity standpoint, I thought was interesting. We talked about the defense as well. And then the last thing I thought was interesting. Again, none of these things where we're talking about Ketch are like, whoa, like headline news, back page of the New York Post. But when I did ask him about, hey, deciding between a young player and an older player, he started talking about trajectory, kind of made a difference. And he talked about consistency in practice, but he used that word trajectory which means to me like a little bit of the upside. And so, I thought that those were kind of some of the things that stood out. And of course, him getting a little snarky with Brian Davis because he didn't like the Kelvin Banks question.
I thought that was the highlight of the entire press conference. And you know what? To Brian Davis's credit, and Brian, if you're out there, shout out to you for even asking the question like that. Sometimes the worst questions provide the best answers. And I thought Brian asked one of the questions. He didn't ask it in the way that I probably would have asked it, but it was so blunt and direct that it clearly disarmed Sarkisian. Sarkisian wasn't taking the bait. He didn't like the way the question was framed, but it was fair. It was, we're all wondering how many of these guys are going to start. And do you have to have a student? If it's not him and you're starting Christian Jones at left tackle in the opener, what does that mean? Like, what can the expectations be for an offensive line if the freshmen, because they're the guys that everybody's basically been pointing to suggest that's where the improvement comes from. So if it's not coming from them, how good is this group that admittedly you're worried about to a certain degree? I thought Davis's question provided an enlightening answer, if nothing else, and it cracked me up. Like, I legitimately laughed out loud when he was like, that's not a good question.
Snarky Sark there. But you know what? It's not a bad question. And come on, Catch. You recruited 6 offensive linemen. It wasn't like you felt like you was good at that position and you only needed like 2 guys. Like, you recruited 6 of those guys. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're trying to do an overhaul at that position. So, I know what he's saying. I get the bigger point of what Sark is saying. Like, I got all these other guys to worry about. But come on, we all know that offensive line. That's going to be how this team goes this year.
If you ask the fan base, they would have said that's not a silly question, and they would have probably answered yes. It's imperative that Kelvin Banks emerge at that position and be really good, and that's part of when we start thinking about trajectory and all of that stuff. That's got to be a one of those deals where when you bring up Kelvin Banks, part of the answer is his trajectory is higher than anybody else's. He's at least as good as anybody else. We're going to play him. He's going to get that question a lot over the coming weeks. He didn't want it today because the kid hasn't even practiced yet. But how many practices go by before Kelvin Banks is running with the first team? Like, so Brian might yet be like, he'll be vilified today because, that was a bad question. But if by the end of the first week it looks like Kelvin Banks is your starter at left tackle, he just acknowledged the elephant in the room that maybe the head coach wasn't quite ready for. Darwin in the Super Chat.
I could definitely think of worse questions that occurred during all the press conferences. And I'm not going to pick on anybody, but I could definitely think of some questions from – never mind. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it.
Brian, if you see this, if you hear this, if you're watching this, you made me laugh, and I appreciated the question and the directness of it. And attaboy, I don't care what Sark says. Darwin asked in the Super Chat, Anwar, is this going to be an OU Riley year, 50-48 all year? I'm starting to think that. I mean, maybe, yeah. Like, that is within the realm of possibilities for certain.
Bet the over in all the games, and I think you'll have a nice Christmas present when it's all said and done. There's nothing I've seen that I'm thinking to myself, oh snap, wow, this could be a defensive battle. No, this is definitely going to be long games. Catch a lot of long late games for us because there's going to be a lot of passing.
Overweight Lover, we'll knock out a few super chat questions because they stacked up a little bit. He asks, which trio would you rather have? The 2018 Devin Duvernay, Colin Johnson, Lil Jordan Humphrey trio, or the Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Nayor, Jordan Whittington? I'm guessing that's who J.E. was supposed to be.
Yeah, it's right next to the W button on the keyboard.
I'm not real worried about what Sam could do with this offense. I think Sam, but in terms of which group you would rather have, Anwar, do you have a direction you would lean in?
I mean, you're talking about Devin Duvernay draft pick, Colin Johnson draft pick, Little Jordan Humphrey making a home in the NFL, undrafted, but finding a home in the LA and doing really good. We know Xavier Worthy will be a draft pick. Isaiah Nayor remains to be seen if he emerges into one, and Jordan Whittington remains to be seen if he emerges into one. Knock on wood, Jordan has to stay healthy, and we hope he does for all 12 games. Right now, I'll take the former. I'll take the guys. I mean, Devin Duvernay. I mean, he had an outstanding season. Catch. And Colin Johnson was a guy that was hard to cover. So Devin Duvernay, what was he, like 1,500 yards, and Colin Johnson was almost at 1,000.
I think it comes down to there's three separate questions here. Mm-hmm. Do you take Xavier Worthy or Devin Duvernay? Each of those groups has a superstar. And there's probably not a wrong answer because Devin Duvernay was so good in 2018, and yet Xavier Worthy may be the best receiver in the history of the program by the time he leaves. And I wouldn't say that about Devin Duvernay. I think there's a little bit of fuzzy math when we look at the other two guys in that 2018 group, in that Colin Johnson, yes, did turn into an NFL draft pick and an NFL player, but in 2018, he was an up and down guy. And then Lil Jordan Humphrey really had his breakout after Devin Duvernay left the program. So the Lil Jordan Humphrey that we best remember wasn't really available in 2018. Yet, when you do look at this current group, I think, to be fair with what you said, I would probably take Isaiah Nayor over Colin Johnson at this point. I would take what Isaiah Nayor had done through 2021 over what Colin Johnson had done through 2017 going into the seasons. And Jordan Whittington has got to prove he can stay on the field. So while I think he's better than what the 2018 version of Lil Jordan Humphrey was, the person who would want to argue for the 2018 version of that group could very easily say, well, what exactly is Jordan Whittington? I mean, is he an all Big 12 player? I don't know that we know that. I think we know he has that kind of a talent. It's actually a really good question.
It's a fascinating question.
I think I would lean 2022 over 2018, but I do understand the argument for 2018, and I'm taking a real big leap of faith in I think Isaiah Nayor more than anything else. I think if you're asking me to separate the groups as a number 2 receiver, I think Isaiah Nayor is more dangerous and has more upside than what I think a limited Colin Johnson ended up being. Colin Johnson had a certain kind of play that he was really good at the collegiate level. I think Isaiah Nayor is a little bit more diverse in the ways that he can be used, which can apply pressure on the defense. I think the 2022 group's a little bit more complete, but boy, it's probably a rhetorical question at this point. I don't think either one of us could give a absolute definitive answer to it.
It's tough. I lean 2018 That's where I would lean towards 2018 over love. It's a fantastic question, one of the better questions. You ask great questions all the time. That's a good one. But I lean 2018 only because I've seen the results, right? So it's easier for me to look back and I've seen the results. I know what Xavier Worthy is, and when it's all said and done, I mean Xavier Worthy. Here's why I could lean towards this group, because Xavier Worthy, Catch, when it's all said and done, might be a first round pick. So if he's a first round pick, then he ends up, surpassing what everyone else does. And so, but I lean 2018. But damn, I'm not going to stand on the table. I can tell you that damn much.
Hey, Jay Lee, when appropriate, please answer Ewers' question I sent on OB. Do you know what that is?
No. Can you just ask it again here or just do something where we can get it? And you said when appropriate. I don't think it's.
I remember getting a question in my DMs vaguely about this, but I've had about 500 DMs in the last week. I remember telling someone to ask a question in the super chat, and I just can't remember what it was.
I mean, so just so you know, Jay Lee, this.
I know what it is.
Okay,
I know what it is. He gave me one word, and I was like, Columbus. What is it? He won the. So Jay Lee's super chat question was essentially, what do we think, if anything, Quinn Ewers was able to take from one season at Ohio State?
Oh, okay. I get what he's saying. Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things. I know you said he's saying one thing. The Ohio State situation is a little murky one. Because you can look at, okay, this guy was fourth string, what that was about, and then and maybe when Ewers transferred, no one was crying a river, but there was a disconnect with Ewers and that staff. There was a belief that promises were made to Ewers that Ryan Day and that staff did not live up to. And so when you have that, there just seemed to be a little friction that was occurring, that was there. And then, when you have a young man that leaves that far from home and having that kind of friction that's there's a lot of things that go along with that for someone who's just still a teenager, and what that does to a kid's psyche, emotions, and things to that effect. And as a parent, what do you say? Like, I got to bring my kid home. Like, I'm not going to let my kid sit up there and suffer and be miserable for whoever. So you got to bring them home. So, if you're asking, what did he learn from, sure, I'm sure he learned a tons of things as far as the quarterback, position and things to that effect. That part is valuable. But I think the biggest thing that you should take away, Jay Lee, is from everything I've heard is that Ewers is happy. He's happier than he's ever been. He enjoys being here at Texas. He's around teammates that have embraced him. Hell, they were recruiting him because they want him so bad. Xavier Worthy is one of his roommates, in addition to Jahdae Barron. They've made him the face of the program to a certain degree, so he's happier, and I think that will reflect a little bit better, and I think is reflecting in his play. So you talk, he's learned some things, obviously, just being around Ryan Day. But, Steve Sarkisian is a good football coach. I think the biggest thing is his happiness. I think that's the biggest thing that you'll be able to take away.
I mean, I think that for me, every kid that comes from the high school level to the major college level has to make the speed adjustment of the game and what it's like for not just the receivers to be better, the DBs to be better, but for all of it to be faster. And I think that he, for 6 months, 5 months at Ohio State, he saw what that looks like at the elite level. Ohio State's really good. They were really good a year ago. They'll be really good this year. And, I think he got to make that initial adjustment at an incredibly high level. And I think when he comes to Texas, I don't think it's quite at that level, but he's already played at a record that's playing at a higher, faster speed than what he'll probably see at Texas. So I think the game probably does slow down a little bit. I think he's able to come to Texas and things slow down a little bit, as opposed to he probably, while at Ohio State, dealt with an enormous speed going faster and just acclimated him to the college game in a way where, he'll be better off having gone through that. He's more prepared to play today than he would be had he just enrolled in the spring and not had that semester at Ohio State. I think it did prepare him better for what awaits him this season. And I think that makes the Texas football program better this year. He's going to be the starting quarterback. So anything that he was able to ascertain and learn that makes this season easier for him, I think is a win. There's probably a lot of little things, but I think more than anything else, there's nothing that he can see in practice at the University of Texas that is more overwhelming than what he would have seen in that first semester at Ohio State. Even if just playing with the scout team, he's then playing against first-team players, NFL-level players. That's a little bit different than what he would have been seeing in the Class 6A ball, at South Lake Carroll. So, I think that it's a lot of little things more than one really critical thing.
Can I just have one more thing, Ketch?
Yeah.
And this is your wheelhouse. Ohio State isn't known for recruiting bad quarterbacks, right? That's not something that we look at that you like, man, you went to Ohio State, you must not be a good quarterback. While I'm not trying to make a comparison in any way, I'm just using this as an example. Joe Burrow was an afterthought at Ohio State. Just a guy. They've got their other guys that they care about a little bit more. And Joe Burrow was a guy that you would look at and be like, oh man, he was at Ohio State, did nothing. And then he just ends up being one of the best quarterbacks in college football history. Again, not making a comparison, but going to Ohio State and being a quarterback there, and maybe some things don't work out, that's not necessarily a badge of shame. Like, Ohio State quarterbacks are good, Catch. They're usually all freaking good.
Well, I mean, and we may end up saying something similar about the Texas quarterback room in the coming years. If Malik Murphy doesn't beat out Arch Manning, he may very well go anywhere else and end up actually having the skill set needed to play really well at this level, and then potentially even to the next level. So, where you want to get your program to a point where there's so much talent that really good players can't win jobs. There are only so many programs across the country right now where that's actually the case. I think that Texas isn't there yet. But if there's a position where they may get there faster than any other, it might be the quarterback position, which if you had to pick one, you'd rather be super great at quarterback and everything else kind of figures its way out. I think we've answered that Quinn Ewers question, though. Overweight Lover says, did anybody ask about access to practice this year? Alex? Remember Alex told us that he felt like he needed to lose about 10 pounds? Is he the overweight lover? Because I feel like this is an Alex question. Did anybody ask about access to practice this year? Do they have a schedule out when they do practice? Anwar, I'll just let you take that one.
Overweight lover. That's it. This person is definitely an Alex friend. Like, or this is, this. Now we know what Alex's alias is. When he goes Kevin Durant. There'll be access. We'll have media access tomorrow afternoon. We'll have practice access on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week. And practice will be in the afternoon. So, you'll probably hear a bunch of bitching and complaining from out-of-shape reporters who are talking about how hot it is and how they can't stand being out in the heat. But yes, we'll have it. What will we get from a practice access standpoint? Well, it's not going to be anything sexy. We'll take the best that we can from it, but what they Sarkisian doesn't give us team periods. Like we've got team periods under previous coaches. Sarkisian's a little bit more tight than that. So, he won't necessarily go head over heels to, Sarkisian's allowing us to see things, but he's also allowed us to see things from 200 yards away. Okay. So, you've been out to that practice field and, look, we listen, just so you understand where we are, overweight lover, just so you get where they feel about as far as the media is concerned. I'm only saying this because you asked this. I'm not saying this as a bitch or complaint, but because you asked it. When practice starts, media members aren't allowed to stand on the same street as the play as practice field is. We have to stand across the street away from there, so they don't want us to take pictures or videos of anyone walking in, and so we have to stand across the street and then wait until we're called upon to go inside. And so and then a lot of times in the practice, they have two long practice fields, and we can only stand on the one cement. So they'll have practice on the defensive side, which is like easily 150 or more yards away, but you're not allowed. Other coaches will let us go around. They won't let us there. So we'll do the best that we can, but they're not really going above and beyond to really make sure, that we have any kind of real access.
We're researching drones, though. So stay tuned. I'm sure the coaches won't mind a little bit of zzz. They won't mind that buzz at all.
That. There's going to be a point in time when technology hits, Catch, and like Google Earth will allow you to see things live as it's happening. And then we'll just sit on our laptops at home and just watch practice.
Play-by-play from Google Earth. That would be fantastic. Anwar, I'm looking at the clock. We're almost creeping up on the hour. I want to do something real quick.
Okay.
Flood and Banks. Give me your big takeaways from both of those two coaches dealing with the media today. We've talked obviously a lot about Sarkisian and Kwiatkowski. For you and your money, the Banks and Flood portion of today's proceedings, the highlights were what?
Well, so first of all, I'll start with Banks. Banks is high energy. He's a really good talker. He's a really good quote. If Banks ever became a head coach, I think he's a reporter's dream for some of the things that he says. He talked about, to your point, Catch, the how hard and tough it is to not only, to replace a punter, a kicker, and then someone that kicks off. Catch, it's so easy to take for granted, like the kickoff, until your guy doesn't get it to the end zone and it goes out of bounds at the 10-yard line and they put it, in the 35 for someone else. Like those things are easy to take for granted. So his concern of like him saying, hey, this is what's happening. But he also talked about, Isaac Pearson and his work ethic and how he's one of the hardest workers that's out there. He's always out there working, said sometimes too much. But he feels really good about Pearson, and then going to have a punting competition, kicking competition, and seeing what happens from there. I'm not taking any of the comments that are coming up there. I'm just going to let that be a personal thing between him and his lovely woman. I'm just leaving it at that. So I thought, was that I thought, so that was probably the biggest takeaways. He did say he said something interesting, Catch. He said he was really excited about 6 players, and potentially younger players, and getting them on special teams. But he didn't say who they were but he did he kind of revealed that he has some excitement about what's going to be going on, from a special teams perspective. I did ask him about Jatavian Sanders, and it was a really revealing answer, Catch, because essentially, Catch, that's one of the things, guys, I think we've been asked about a ton since he stepped on campus. Jatavian Sanders, what's going on? And essentially Banks outlined it. Like, he laid it out really well, that about Jatavian being a guy that, yes, when he comes in high school, some of the simplistic things that he was asked to do, he excelled in. But when it was basically coming down to the blocking portion, Jatavian struggled. And so you talked about how he had to go for a guy like Cade Brewer, who may have been smaller, but Cade knew how to do certain things. He also said Cade Brewer was stronger, which is shocking because you have seen Jatavian Sanders. That's not something I expected him to say at all. But then they talked about even how he started off this spring slow, and they were kind of a little disappointed in him, challenged him, and they said like he had 10 straight practices, but there was no drops. And then he kind of emerged into a leader, and it ends up being the guy that they rely on. So it was interesting. I want to get what your thought on this is, Ketch. He said that Jatavian and Gunnar Helm are so good that basically they allow him to sleep at night, right? That's how good they are. Then later on, he said, but Jaleel Billingsley has 30 days to prove himself to us. And I was like, whoa. I didn't see that coming. What were your thoughts when you heard that?
I did several, honest to God, because I was getting those updates on Twitter at the time, right? That wasn't part of the live broadcast of Sarkisian's comments. So when I saw it, I was like, who's he talking about? Is that specific? I wasn't sure. I mean, I read it as, boy, that's specific to Billingsley. It's a hell of a call out, quite frankly, for a guy that Mel Kiper Jr. thinks is one of the top 5 tight ends in the upcoming NFL draft. Billingsley played with the 2s in the spring game, and Sanders ran with the 1s. And I remember thinking, well, that's notable because that second-team offense looked like the second-team offense outside of, from a personnel standpoint. It was like, okay, well, Billingsley's thought to be starting level good. And it sounds like he's the 3rd guy right now. And there's no way to get away from what he said with regards to Billingsley other than that dude has to be a lot better or he ain't going to play a lot. That's because this isn't an offense that throws the tight end position around a bunch. I mean, if one of those guys catches 25 passes this year, that will be notable. Billingsley, I think from the outside looking in, a lot of people would think he would be the favorite to do that. That is not what Jeff Banks said today. He couldn't have been more direct and honest about last 10 practices of the spring. Jatavian Sanders was getting after it and doing exactly what we want from him and getting better every day. And oh, by the way, Gunnar Helm is really good too. We need to see. He was like, basically, we need to see some man stuff from Jaleel Billingsley. All right. I mean, if you're Billingsley, that'll get back to you, I would imagine.
Oh, I can't imagine it took long.
And he knows where, and I'm sure look, here's the thing. I'm guessing Banks, to me, made that clear in the spring because I was really surprised that Billingsley in the spring game didn't get a little bit of run with the first team. But, hearing Banks explain it today, I mean, now we know why. I mean, Banks is being pretty transparent with his Alabama transfer. Get it together or these other dudes are going to play. That one, that was a little bit of an eye raiser because I do think there's a lot of people that think Billingsley. I was having this conversation with somebody online a week ago when they were ranking the receiving threats on the team. I think it was Doc Allen over on Twitter, and they had Billingsley ranked inside the top 8. And I was like, Sanders is better, and he's ahead right now going into camp. And it looks like Banks would agree based on his comments today.
Yeah. I mean, Banks kept it a buck. I'll give that guy credit. He kept it a buck. And the thing is, he wasn't throwing him under the bus by any stretch of the imagination, but he gave it really, detailed, things. And he started talking about Juan Davis, and how he's, feeling good about Juan, and he mentioned some other guys. So, but Billingsley was the only person, and he said it's very specific. It's got 30 days to show us something.
Was it 30 or 20?
No, I said 20 originally, and I went back and listened to it, and he said 30.
Okay.
So I said 20. So you're correct. I went back and heard it. I was like, it was 30. Essentially, he's saying he's got camp. He's got. We'll give him camp to prove to us that he, something special. But right now, it's Jatavian, Gunner. Those guys help me sleep at night. Oh shit! Say no more.
I don't understand this super chat question.
Billingsley, party at Taylor's house. You better be there. Going to get wasted. Party at Taylor's. Isn't that guy like 30? I'm so confused, Eric. I mean, you spent $10. We put it on the screen, but we don't. Taylor who? Like, I don't even know what we're talking about. A movie?
Okay.
Well, do you know the movie he's talking about?
I don't. At first, I thought he was referencing our former Orange Bloods companion. But then it was like, that guy's 35, and I was like, why is there a party at Taylor's house? I didn't get it. And I'm usually, it's a Friday Night Lights reference. Sorry about that. I watched Friday Night Lights, but I didn't. I'm not ever going to remember any quotes other than, just FYI. It's funny how I remember quotes from movies more than I remember quotes from TV. I wonder why that is.
That's a great question. Just because so much of a TV, you remember scenes. I don't know, but did you have a TV show that you watched a lot though?
Oh yeah.
Is there a TV show right now? Because I call it, like, for me, mindless TV. Things I like to turn on just to detox, right, and just to relax. Are there shows right now that? A TV show that, like The Office or something like that, like you'll just throw it on and not even eat fine.
My wife is more of the let's watch the TV series. I've seen every Parks and Rec and every Office episode 40 times. And I can quote The Office, actually, I think, right? Like, snip, snap, snip, snap. Like I can go, I can do Michael Scott. But I think it's far and few between the number of TV shows where that's the case.
Gotcha.
I can remember some stuff from The Wire. You end up you can quote Omar. It's not that there's not TV shows that are quotable. I'm just saying, generally speaking, I remember movie quotes a lot more than I remembered TV quotes.
That's a good point. Well, the movie is just a one-time thing. The TV show, it would definitely have to leave it. Like, I grew up watching the Cosby Show. I don't think I remember anything from any famous. I remember scenes, but I don't know if I remember any particular quotes there. Parks and Rec is way better than The Office.
I love both. I don't think Parks and Rec is better than The Office, but it's, it might be time to wrap it up for me. I got dogs barking on me.
That's where we're at. Yeah.
I mean, I think that means my kids are home, and it's not going to get better.
You know what? And really, when we're breaking down Parks and Rec versus The Office, we're probably at the end of the show anyway.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So why don't we do this? I haven't said it in an hour. Guys, like the video. Do it right now before you leave. It's not manual labor. Just take your fingers and click the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, by all means, please do that as well. We're creeping up towards 13,000 members. We'll be back at this tomorrow. We haven't exactly got it figured out the time yet, but tomorrow's first day of practice. Sarkisian will be talking after the first day of practice. We think there may be some player availability as well, I think. I don't know.
I think it's just Sark tomorrow, believe. I believe it's just Sark tomorrow. But we will have our first look at practice and Sarkisian talking afterwards. So Drunk Uncle will happen a little bit later than usual because Sark's going to talk sometime after 5 o'clock. And so by the time I get home, type up stuff, it's going to be later, but it'll happen at some point. And Ketchum and I will break it down.
Overweight lover real last thing, Overweight Lover was like, can you answer my Morris super chat? I have nothing on that. I've got a million things on my mind right now, Overweight Lover, and Morris's legal issues and whatever happens on the basketball side of things. No offense. I ignored that question because I got nothing. So I can answer it, which is to say I've got nothing new on the Arterio Morris situation. I'll check with my basketball guy and see if he's got anything going on. I mean, the moment there's an update, now I got my phone going off, like my mom's calling, you know. For myself and Anwar Richardson, sorry, we snuck that in the end. We did at least answer the question. You guys have a great night. We will talk to you tomorrow.